Wow. I don't know how you say wow in Vietnamese. A focus of our time together this morning is to celebrate something wonderful that God has shown us about His heart and His plan for the peoples of the world. And it's this: that seeds sown amongst people who lack access to the gospel can, in time, grow into the very churches, the very people He intends to use for His glory, even in the most critical of times. These stories can be long ones, even 100-year stories, but they have a full circle nature to them.
The story of the church in Vietnam is one of these 100-year full circle stories. As early as 1894, Dr. Simpson was calling Alliance members to pray for what was then called Annam. First efforts were not very fruitful. It was 1911 when a first mission outpost was established in Da Nang. Early sowing of seeds was slow work. But in the 1920s, remarkable response began. A.W. Tozer wrote that from the beginning of the work showed signs of more than human effort. Special providences, miracles, precise timings, sufferings, courage, grace, and a blazing zeal were all in abundant measure.
Early Alliance missionaries, under the leadership of Robert Jaffrey, sought to train and to trust Vietnamese leaders, to evangelize, to serve as pastors, to lead their churches to reach their own and to reach even beyond, to the hill peoples, to the mountain peoples of their land. Many new churches were born in this period that led up to World War II and the throwing off of French colonial power in Vietnam. Then under Ho Chi Minh, a communist state was established in the north, launching what most of us in the West know as the Vietnam War. In the next period, the church and the mission suffered great setbacks, loss of life, kidnappings, imprisonments. After the Tet Offensive of 1968, in which Alliance missionaries were martyred at Ban Me Tuot, things moved rapidly in favor of the communist North.
But God was at work as His people cried out to Him. A revival broke out in 1971. And by 1975, when the South fell and the missionaries were forced to leave Vietnam, 483 churches were filled with over 150,000 believers. The years that followed were ones of still more suffering and turmoil for the churches. Yet in Vietnam, churches multiplied again and again. In many other countries, Vietnamese churches were formed by those who fled. Today, there are more than 1.2 million believers in more than 2,700 churches in Vietnam.
Amen.
In the U.S., 108 churches, like the one whose choir just ministered to us, are home to 12,700 believers, ministering among Vietnamese Americans and beyond.
Amen. As we look forward to the return of the King, folks, God is at work in our world. You see, He takes those first few seeds, often sown in tears, to raise up something that He will lead. Maybe it's 100 years, but full circle, so that churches and movements of people are poised for days such as these. This is the story of the church in Vietnam, and this morning we'll learn that this is the story of what God is doing in the Middle East, in places like Syria and Lebanon. Until we see Him coming on the clouds, let's be asking Him to write more 100-year full circle stories again and again and again. Amen.